He said, Mom has a sewing machine, just sew them together. And I said, well, that's not really how it works, Alan. You can't really, but I tried to take my hook, but his chains were so knotted that I couldn't even get the hook into some of the chains.
The world's skinniest
scarf. Yeah, skinny scarf.
But it's impressive.
I was trying to think about how to do it, trying to figure it out. But finally I said, well, look, Alan, just sit next to me and I'll do it, and I'll show your hands how to do it. Just follow my hands. And so I had him sit right by me, and I put my hand over his hand, and then the tension was what he couldn't do very well. He could go in and out, but the tension was a problem. So I kind of did the tension. So it was pretty hilarious. 3 rows was enough. I'm going, okay, this is long enough. And it was a short one, but he was so proud of that scarf he crocheted.
He could have braided if he had 3.
That's true. I could have had him braided.
It could have been a very unique.
There we go. A unique scarf.
Don't you think people, that's a relaxing habit?
I think it really was for him because he spent quite a bit of time just with his feet out, sitting on the edge of the couch, just going at it. It's like a pattern or rhythm, and he was just chaining away. So,
A lot of the men in the Navy on the ships during World War II did crocheting and knitting because you're so confined in such a small spot, and you can do a lot of other things.
yeah, keeps your hands busy.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of
Keeps your mind
interesting.
working. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it was pretty funny.
But actually, for him and his sister both, it's impressive how well they can focus on a task if they get interested.
Yeah.
And learn how to do something.
Yeah, their mom and dad, they rarely turn on the television. They can watch TV like if they're just watching a show, like a video, but they don't just watch TV. And I think they really have pretty good attention spans because of it. They don't, and when they watch television, they sit and watch, they just watch that 30 minutes. They don't, it's attentive. So I think that's pretty smart. They've got a smart mom and dad. I don't know how we did it, Marvin, but they turned out okay. Better than what we raised them, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so too.
At least on one side.
I know. My side too. If I feel like I learned more about raising kids after my kids were gone from home than I knew when I was raising them. I feel like if I only knew then what I know now, right?
And I've been appreciative that sometimes God works out things fairly well in our kids in spite of our errors.
In spite of us, I know. He's a good God.
Yeah.
He's a good God. So next week, I am going to go ahead and teach my class at 8 o'clock. So if you would like to come at 8 o'clock, the service won't be over later than usual. It'll be the service, and then that special program will still be over for lunch at noon. So, and they're providing lunch, so it should be good. So I think I'd like to just keep going on if you don't mind. And we are in David Jeremiah's prophecy answer book. We've been reading questions out of this each week. They're little short sections, so I'm going to read to you this one. I'm going to try to say the words clear.
Quick question.
Uh-huh.
So the following week, after next week, you're going to just continue on to the next. Okay, so those of us who don't come at 8, if we wish to, we could probably go on the Facebook feed and watch your lesson that we missed.
It's on Facebook, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I just decided that it's easy to for that to happen rather than skip a Sunday. It's really hard because we skipped last Sunday and people get into a pattern of coming. I hate to break a pattern of coming, especially at 8 o'clock. Okay, so Dr. David Jeremiah's book, the Prophecy Answer book, we're on one that has odd names, but I'm going to do my best. I'm just going to fake it, That's what I always do. I fake the names, right?
And whatever you say is right.
So if you want to argue about it after class, you can tell me, you can correct me. But otherwise, I'm just faking it, pretending like I know how to say it. Now, the word of the Lord. Oh, here's the question. What present-day nations will form a coalition that will march against Israel as prophesied by Ezekiel? Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out with all your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops. Many people are with you. Prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. That is Ezekiel 38, verses 1 through 7. Okay, come on. Sorry. Don't ever touch this page because I licked it. As you can see, Ezekiel's prophecy begins with a list of proper names. Many of these names identify certain grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Noah, who were the fathers of nations that for a time bore their names. In other words, that those nations had names for a while, and then eventually the nation names changed, but those were sons of Noah and his family. These nations, which today no longer bear their original names, will ultimately form a coalition that will march against Israel. As we identify these nations by their present names and locate them on today's world map, we can see how the stage is being set for this predicted Russian Islamic invasion of Israel. Gog is an exception on Ezekiel's list. Gog is not one of the descendants of Noah, listed in Genesis 10. This name, however, is found 11 times in Ezekiel 38 to 39. It is not the name of a nation, but rather the title of the ruler of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, the one who leads the invasion against Israel. In fact, Gog means ruler or the man on top. It is clear that Gog is an individual rather than a nation, because God addresses him as such several times in this prophecy in Ezekiel 38:14 and 39:1. Furthermore, Gog is explicitly called a prince and a ruler in Ezekiel 38:2 and 39:1. And so Put and Cush are tribes that would be down from the coastal region of Africa there on the west side of Africa, northwest side of Africa. Persia and Russia, so Iraq, Iran, and the Russian area, that would all be a part of Rosh, Magog, Cush, Put, and Persia, Gomer, those guys, and Meshech. That's all surrounding Israel. In October 2007, during Russian President Vladimir Putin's first ever visit to Iran, an Iranian newspaper reported that he reassured Iran that the Bushehr nuclear reactor, a $1 billion energy project being built by Russia and dogged by delays, would be completed. The report went on to suggest maybe the most important result of Putin's trip is to show the independence of Russia toward America and the West. Putin made another first-time ever visit of a Russian leader to the Muslim nations of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, and most recently, Libya. By all reports, his visits were successful financially, resulting in lucrative agreements and contracts for further joint efforts in the production of oil and exploration of natural gas reserves. So these are all countries that are surrounding Israel. Apparently, the Russian president was successful politically as well. In Libya, President Gaddafi and Putin agreed that the United Nations needs to be reformed in order to face an imbalance of forces internationally, and especially the Security Council, with which we can work together to resolve problems. In other words, by working together, they could remove the veto vote held by the U.S. and be able to advance their mutual cause. So that's, as you see powers struggling with one another, we see the powers surrounding Israel beginning to come together and form a closer to a majority, trying to take rule away. So anyway, interesting. We'll keep our eyes and ears open. So today we are in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Woohoo! We did from verses 1 to 25, and you would think it would have been super boring, but it actually was kind of interesting. And today we have some more really interesting things. Remember that in Deuteronomy, Moses is talking about reminding the children of their parents' lessons. You remember we talked about how their parents had experienced things. These kids were 20 years old, would be the oldest, so now they're 60. The 20-year-olds are 60. And everyone under 20 is still alive, and they had more kids. But Moses is talking to them, saying, now, you people, reminding him that they are part of the people now. They're the ones who are going to be going into the land. He reminds them that it is his land. Remember we talked about that? God said, this is my land. I'm giving it to you. I own this land. I own the land. Nobody owns the land. The people that are there, they didn't follow me. They're going to be out and you're going to be in. And there's a very clear statement through what we've read through from the beginning of Deuteronomy now is that this land belongs to God, and he decides who's going to be on it, and he's decided the ones there are going to be out. So make sure I have. We saw at the end on chapter 4, verse 25 and 26, we saw the prophecy where later in Isaiah, we see that Isaiah, when he writes his book, it's a book about a court scene. And when we did Isaiah last time, we made a script, and we had one person be the earth, and one person be heaven, and one person be the God, the judge. And it's like a courtroom scene, like a play going on in that book. And heaven and earth testifies against the children of Israel that they did not do what God said to do. And so in Deuteronomy 4, 25 and 26, it mentions that heaven and earth will testify to the truth of what happens. So those are all things that we talked about last time a little bit, just to remember a little bit. Now we're in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 26b. When it says B, that means like the second half of the verse. So it says, you will not live there long, but will certainly be destroyed. Well, that's a happy thing to be telling them as they go into the land. But then we do have this prophetic clause right here. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. There you will worship man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or eat or smell. So they eventually get scattered, and they eventually do come back and get scattered again. And so that's what that's talking about. It's a prophecy of the future. Verse 29. Go ahead.
It's contingent upon the part of 25 above.
Verse 1 and verse 29 says,
If.
But.
Oh, but. Yeah. Well,
verse 29
this
is
destruction is if you become corrupt.
Yes.
And then.
But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him. If you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later days you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed to them by oath. Where are we reading this? Matthew, Mark, Luke. That could have been in the New Testament right there.
Mm-hmm.
And where are we reading it? In Deuteronomy.
Right.
In Deuteronomy. If from there you seek the Lord your God. Is this a truth for us today? From wherever we are, from wherever we have maybe walked the wrong way or gotten into trouble or been captured by sin or been discouraged or feel hopeless. From the very beginning, God provided the path. What do we need to do? Seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in latter days you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed by oath. We see this in other verses also. Look at Micah 6:8. He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Wait a minute. Are we supposed, shouldn't they be listing, well, commandment number 1, commandment number 2, commandment number 3, aren't those the things that they got punished for?
Yeah, and he doesn't even list all the sacrifices you have to bring
And
to
all
the
the
temple.
sacrifices you
Yeah.
have to bring? We get really confused about the Torah or the law, which we're going to be getting in chapter 5. He's going to give us the law. And that's why I'm making such a point of this, of making sure that everybody sees and understands that we haven't even mentioned the law. This is only talking about following God, seeking God, staying with Him, doing what He has for you to do.
To love and obey.
To love and obey. So we're going to get to the law in a minute, and we'll have more to say. Take a look at other verses. Micah 6:8. That's pretty well Old Testament right there. He has showed you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Does that sound familiar? That could have been in the New Testament. Jeremiah 22:16. He defended the cause of the poor and needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord? Hosea 6:6. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. What were the sacrifices and the burnt offerings for? Forgiveness. So if you have to ask for forgiveness, what does that mean you did?
You messed up.
Something wrong.
Better to do what's right than to ask for forgiveness later, right? Don't do what's wrong because you know that you can ask for forgiveness. And He desires mercy, and He desires acknowledgement of God. That's what He desires. Yes, what?
Oh, she just said that blows my theory.
Okay.
She's got you. Amos 5:24. But let justice roll on like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. Isaiah 29:19. Once more the humble will rejoice in the Lord, the needy will rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. James, wait a minute. We're jumping a gap here. What are we going to now?
New Testament.
Oh, it's shocking how much the New Testament sounds like the Old Testament. Aren't they supposed to be like completely
Almost
different?
like they're in the same book.
Almost like the same one wrote them. James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Wait, didn't we just read that in the Old Testament? I feel like I'm hearing the same words. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. In other words, those other things are good too, but you should have done them all, not neglected one for the other. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So then and now God wants more than blind obedience to His rules. He gave the specific rules to teach us how, or to show us. They were our teachers about what is right and what is pure. You can say, do what is right, but if no one ever tells you what is right, then it's hard to know what that is. So He gave us the Torah, which explains what He considers to be right and good and just. It doesn't mean that those things have to be just like that all the time for ages and ages. We're now under a new covenant. And now from our new covenant point of view, we can view the lessons learned and understand what God considers to be just and right. And we can focus on our heart and our mind instead of on the physical rules themselves. When we do the same thing with our children. I was telling you about Alan. I was teaching him to chain. How did I teach him to chain? I put the loop on my finger and had him pull it over my finger, and then he pulled it down. Then we did it again. I said, okay, now you put the loop over. He put the loop over, and he pulled it over, and then he pulled it down, but I kept holding it, right? Within a couple chains, let me do it, Grandma. Okay, here's, put your finger, but my hands were on top of his hands, and I was helping him make sure he did it. Few chains down, I bring away my hand, then every few chains I'd have to, now wait a minute, you're getting a knot, you gotta make sure and pull this part, right? I guided him, I taught him. So there's a lot more interaction, you have to do it exactly this way. By, within an hour, he's sitting over there in the living room while I'm in the kitchen making tamales, and he's just going away. Well, when I go look at his work, he's got great big knots in it and stuff, but who cares? He gets it, he's starting to get the feel of it. So we do the same thing. We do the small thing, and as they get older, they learn to do their own. So you correct a young child. Do you correct your 39-year-old son in the same way?
Not the same way, no.
Not the same way.
Yeah, I wouldn't grab the chain from my 39-year-old son and say, let me show you how this, right? I might talk him through it. I might do it differently, right? An older child even, you might let them experiment with it a little bit so they want you to help them. So there are things you do that are different with an older child than you do with a very young child. Well, God did the same thing. We were young children, didn't know him at all. And so he put in structure and said, you're going to wake up at this time, and you're going to eat at this time, and then you'll burp at this time, and then I'll lay you back down and you'll sleep. Right? It was all very concrete and structured, but we don't need that now. Well, maybe we do. Sometimes I long for those days, right? But we grow from that and we mature. So now we're on this side of this covenant, and look at the lessons we're learning. We're having to go back and kind of remember some of the stuff that for them was common in their covenant, but we have to remind ourselves of it because it's been a while. Back to Deuteronomy chapter 4, 32, verse 32. Ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created human beings on earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this ever happened? Or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire, as you have and lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation by testings, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? No, all the gods they have are little pieces of wood that topple over if you bump them, right? They don't have a God. And here are all these things that God has done for them. He's saying, I am God. I went back to look at some of these words. This word testings got me curious. In verse 34, the word testings. Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another by testing, by signs and wonders, by war, by mighty hand and outstretched arm? So I looked up that word. It's used 3 times in the scripture, all 3 in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 4:34, 7:19, and 29:3. And the word is masa. It's a noun translated as testing, proving, and trial. So God brought them out, but they went through some rough things to get out, right? And he brought them through those difficult things that they had to go through. They had difficult lessons to learn, and he brought them through that. Is there any God that takes the time to do that? I'll tell you, I'm a great grandma. I deserve a medal. I taught my 6-year-old son to crochet chain, right? I felt good about that. That's what God is saying. I took you measly 6-year-olds and taught you how to make a chain. It's that sense that God is saying here. I brought you people who were not a people out of slavery, brought you into this place, and I'm guiding you. It was a struggle for you. You made lots of knots. The string kept falling off your finger. I had to patiently work with you, but we got to this point. That's what God is saying to him. He's challenging those so-called gods that they have created because none of them revealed power or interaction. None of them, they never actually interacted with any power. They imagined, they made wishes, they made hocus pocus, I'll do this and that. And then nothing happens, right? Everything was generated by them. And the other thing is that they actually did hear his voice. In Exodus 19 and also chapter 20 of 19 and 20, it talks about how Moses spoke to God. And at first, the 70 elders went up on the mountain when they first got the law, and God allowed them to hear him talking to Moses, to the 70 elders. And you know what they said? Okay. We believe now. You just go ahead and listen. We're going to go down to the mountain, and you just go ahead with this, because this is just too much for us. But they heard the voice of God, and they testified that they had heard the voice. Remember also that when Moses was in the tent of meeting, it said that the pillar of cloud and fire would settle over the tent of meeting, and Moses would go in and hear God's commands. And the people would come to the doorway of their tent and see Moses go in to the tent of meeting. There doesn't actually say it, but it almost makes it sound like they could hear God talking to Moses in the tent of meeting, because they saw what was happening. So do they have any God like that? No. Let's talk about the God they have. It's Isaiah 44:15. That's the one I was looking for last week. 44:15. You ready? He cut down cedars, or perhaps took a cypress or oak. He let it grow among the trees of the forest, or planted a pine and the rain made it grow. It is used as fuel for burning. Some of it he takes and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread. But he also fashions a god and worships it. He makes an idol and bows down to it. This idea that it's just a piece of wood that he grew, maybe he grew it on purpose for wood for his fire. He cooks over it, he warms himself, he bakes his bread, and he says, this looks like a good God. I think I'll just make it into a God, fashion it up. And he says, oh, God. I love that passage. I think God says this with sarcasm. Okay, back to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 35. You were shown these things so that. So what do you know that answers right there? If he says, you were showing these things so that, what would be the question you might have asked before that? Why are you showing me these things? Why? Why did God show them the things he did? You are shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Beside him there is no other. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words from out of the fire. Because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength, to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, to give it to you for your inheritance as it is today. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. It's not like you have to pick. It doesn't exist. If you choose to worship your cup, oh, nice cup, that doesn't make it a God. It still has no power, right? You don't make it a God because I love this cup.
Doesn't make it a God, but it makes you a heathen.
That's acknowledge and take.
It doesn't surprise God, and he knows who he is. It bothers me. There's something that's just not. I'm sorry. Why would God be jealous?
Jealous is not jealous like we're thinking jealous. Like I'm
But
jealous.
He says he's a jealous God.
What
And
does
he
jealous
says
mean?
He don't want to share his credit with anybody or anything.
Right.
And
In other words,
it's like with
yes.
and why he had to go through this with the people again, whether it must have been a different down the line people, because to have Aaron take the gold, and, yeah, I just melted and threw it out there and it come out that calf, and tell the people that we just followed the
I know, these people are just like us. We say we're not gonna be gluttonous today, and tomorrow we are gluttonous. We say, I'm not gonna drink alcohol because I can't control my alcohol, and then the next day, we drink it. We say, that's where we are. We're just like them. We say 1 year, I'm going to do what God has to say. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to study. I'm going to get in His Word and really have my heart be true. How long does it last? Sometimes a week, maybe a month, right? Does it last a year? I don't know, but I do find that when I keep trying, I get longer and longer, better and better. I have more self-control. I can do what God's asking me to do better and better. I haven't murdered anyone in a long time.
Oh, you're really righteous.
Right? I think God is bringing us from where we are to where we need to be. And He's going to tell us why. He's going to tell us just coming up here. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God in heaven above and earth below. There is no other. Keep His decrees and commands, which I'm giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you. Did you hear that? Why does He give you the laws and the decrees? So that it may go well with you and your children after you. That is spoken 10 times in the book of Deuteronomy as God's reason for what He does. We think of the law as being so binding. But why does God give us the law? So that we can learn what is right and what is good, and so it will go well for us and for our children. And that you may live long in the land the Lord God gives you for all time. So that's the why. God is setting them up to teach us and all those who follow who He is and what He wants from us. Your children after you and that. This is not only about them, but those who come after. God is setting up something bigger than them, and it will be a curse or blessing to those who come after, not just them. The way you live your life becomes a curse or a blessing to the generations that follow you. And hopefully, every generation we can help to aspire to be closer and closer to the heart of God, doing what God has in mind. And the more we seek to do that, the more we accomplish that task. But thank God He knows that we're not perfect. And at that time, He provided that whole sacrificial system, right? For us in our covenant, what do we have for forgiveness? We have Christ. And we live in the forgiveness of Christ. And so we continue to do what God says is right because for the same reason, so that it will go well for us and for our generations. Isaiah 49:6 says, I will make you a light to the nations that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. Wait. Where was that? In Isaiah? In Isaiah it says, I will make you a light to the nations that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. We're living in that day. We're living in the day when God's salvation is known around the earth to many, many peoples. There was a day when it was just in that land. Now it's around the world that we have people following after Christ.
Right,
Yeah. And Malachi 1:6, Malachi, by the way, Old Testament, that's my point. This is Old Testament. It sounds like the New Testament. Malachi 1:6, your own eyes will see it and you will say, great is the Lord, even beyond the territory of Israel. He Himself says, so that is why, that it may go well with you. So these things that God is giving them are the guidelines for how to make life go well for them then and to the future. And He even has the eye to us in this future. Them as us. Deuteronomy 4, chapter 41. Then Moses set aside 3 cities east of Jordan to which anyone who had killed a person could flee if they had unintentionally killed a neighbor without malice aforethought. They could flee into one of these cities and save their life. The cities were these: Bezer in the wilderness plateau, For the Reubenites, Ramoth and Gilead for the Gadites, and Golan and Bashan for the Manassites. So that's in Numbers 35:6 was where we read about the Levitical cities of refuge. So let's talk about this a minute, because this is one of the things that makes what God is telling them so different. Tribal law will not rule in God's kingdom. God rules in his kingdom. He is going to be in charge of that. So if someone accidentally kills someone, remember we read a week or two ago, they were on if someone is walking by a wall and another person accidentally drops a rock and it lands on the other person and kills them, right? There was that exact example. So they didn't mean to kill him. An accident happened and someone died. What would happen if you're living by tribal law?
We'll get you.
I'm going to get you, and I'm going to get your brother. And then what's the other family do?
Oh, now I'm gonna get you and your brother and your sister.
Yeah. Yeah, payback it never works, does it? I'm going to hit you harder, right? There's never like an even. So God set up this system for accidental killing of somebody, that person could go to a city of refuge. The cities of refuge were designated specifically, and here's a map that shows them where they were. There were three on the east side and 3 on the west side, and of the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River here. So the land they're in right now that Moses is talking about is the land where the 3 tribes were Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh have that land and are there. And now the people are gathered near Jericho, and they haven't gone yet into the promised land on the other side. So there are 3 cities already established. So he's establishing that these are going to be the cities on the other side. And I think that it's important to note that these were Levitical cities. Do you remember what the Levitical cities were? Pardon? Levites, who were
Priests, the priestly family.
They were the tribe that was given the priestly duties. And the priestly duties included all the stuff for forgiveness and all of that, right? Or cleanness, uncleanness, all that kind of stuff. They were kind of like the judges, sort of. They were the ones who made decisions about, are they clean or not clean? Do they have to go out? Do they have to come in, right? And they also offered the sacrifices on behalf. So I think it's interesting that the 6 cities, each of them are Levitical cities. So the government is there. That's where the people are going to be judging and all are at. The Levites can make sure the proper procedures are taken care of for these situations. Now, a person could stay then in that city and be protected until there was one time they were allowed to leave the city, their city of refuge. Do you know when it was?
Top guy dies.
When the head priest, the top priest died, then they would have an opportunity to leave. The next priest takes over and you start over again. So there was that window of opportunity to go back to your clan if it was safe. Mm-hmm. It's a way of making it orderly, right? It's adding orderliness to it.
Over there, they still talk about those cities. But there are places for those people
Yeah.
in this country.
Okay. Now in verse 44, we're still in Deuteronomy 4. Starting at verse 44, he's going to introduce the law. And this is a pretty cool introduction. I'll try to do my best. This is the law Moses set before the Israelites. These are the stipulations, decrees, and laws Moses gave them when they came out of Egypt and were in the valley near Beth Peor, east of the Jordan, in the land of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon and was defeated by Moses and the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. They took possession of his land and the land of Og, king of Bashan, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan. This land extended from Aror on the rim of the Arnon Gorge to Mount Sirion, that is Hermon, and included all the Arabah east of the Jordan as far as the Dead Sea below the slopes of Pisgah. And in case you wonder where that was, it's right here. That's what we saw on this map.
What is that today?
Well, right here is Israel. It's like a little tiny line through here. So you got Iraq and Iran and all the countries around. Okay, so you might be wondering what this could have that would be useful for us. First of all, the word law in Hebrew is Torah. And we don't correctly understand that because we, being Greek-based in our language, we think of the word law. In fact, in the Septuagint, when the Greeks interpreted the Hebrew, they interpreted the word Torah to mean law. The problem is that the Torah was a comprehensive teaching, not just like a list of laws. And around 250 was when the Jewish scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, and they translated the word Torah as the usual Greek word for law. So it typically appears in English translations. The word Torah is a bigger than law word. The Torah is rules, laws, and comprehensive teachings. All that stuff we read in Numbers, where we read about how it explained it. The 10 Commandments, you could say, are the general law, the general principles, but then you have all the details of how that's going to be enforced. So Moses is emphasizing in this section, just before he introduces the Torah, what we call the law. I'm going to use the word Torah to make sure you remember that it's bigger than just 10 Commandments. And Moses is emphasizing how they got to the very land they're standing on. Because against all odds, they conquered the two mighty kings of the Amorites, Sihon and Og. That's why he's mentioning them. You guys, can you believe where you are? Look, you conquered these kings. Who would have thought that you would have ever been able to conquer these kings? They're sons of slaves who fled from Egypt. They trembled at the report of spies when Moses had sent into the Canaan. And they complained about every inconvenience they experienced on the journey. They were a bunch of whiners, right? But their children have grown up out in this desert and this land. They're a little tougher. So these sons of those people are the ones who actually defeated these two larger-than-life kings. So he's reminding them of where they came and where they are now. And he's saying that only with God's strong and mighty arm could the Israelites have accomplished such a thing. And so that's what he's saying to them. And now he's going to give them the Torah. So Moses summoned all Israel and said, if you want to read the first time the Torah is given, that is in Exodus 19:5. That's when it starts, and it goes through chapter 20. And here Moses says, hear, O Israel, the decrees and laws I declare in your hearing today. Learn them and be sure to follow them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that the Lord made this covenant, but with us. Why is he saying that? They're the children. He's saying, you have the same promise that your fathers had. With all of us who are alive here today, the Lord spoke to you face to face out of the fire in the mountain. At that time, I stood between the Lord and you to declare to you the word of the Lord, because you were afraid of the fire. It did not go up on the mountain. So God's covenant with Israel was given at Mount Horeb, which is Sinai, and it's now being confirmed. And it has blessings and it has curses. If you follow, it's blessings. If you don't follow, you're going to experience curses. Notice it says with us in this passage. It uses the term with us, making sure that they know they were a part of that, even though some of them weren't there when that happened, but their parents were. And so he's reminding them of that. And then he gives them principles to live by. He gives them 10 key principles or concepts. And the instructions given for the people and the Levites are the way they will implement or fulfill the principles. So he gives the law, which is the 10 Commandments, and then he explains how that gets fulfilled. God himself gave them the principles and then the specific rules for implementation. That's what we call the Torah. Christ on the Sermon on the Mount helps the people understand how to apply the same principles to the new covenant. He does not abolish the law. He fulfills the law. So the 10 Commandments are central stipulations of God's covenant with Israel made at Sinai. It's almost impossible to exaggerate the effect of the Torah on subsequent history. They constitute the basic moral principles for most of the Western world. And God expects his people in terms of faith, worship, and conduct, what he expects. So back in Deuteronomy 5, verse 6, do you see my little blue one? See, I have a little blue one? because that's commandment number 1. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 1. Number 2. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So if you're with him, he's with you. If you're not with him, you're in bad shape. 3rd commandment, verse 11. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Is that about cursing? No.
No.
What is that about? What would be misusing God's name?
Leading somebody down the garden path on Christianity, foul, not doing what God says and calling yourself a Christian, basically.
Yeah, it would
Leading
be,
somebody else to do it.
and it would be telling someone that God says this or God says that, and it's not true. Lying to people, saying something that is untrue about what God has said or done. That is a
If
that
I worship that cup, I'll be a better Christian.
right. If I were to tell you that, the curse would be on me because I misused God's name. I said something that God did not say. That was not true. That's why it's so very important that we're careful what we teach, that we stick close to the Word of God, to what God has to say.
Also, one of the things that we do as Christians is we end our prayer with "in Jesus' name," and I think that's correct. But you better be correct about what you're asking.
Yeah, be respectful for sure. The 4th one is observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Now, wait a minute. That's really one of the 10 commandments? So, like, we have to go to church on Saturday?
It's what's in the heart that counts, I think. And
That's true, but you still have to go by, your heart might not be telling you the right thing.
When we go to church on Sunday in celebration of Christ rising on a Sunday, are we keeping this commandment? Are we observing the Sabbath and keeping it holy?
It depends on what you do the rest of the day.
No connection? Speak up. What do you say?
I don't think so, because that's under the law, we're under the new covenant, and so we gather based on what Christ did for us, not the Torah or the law.
Mhm.
But we're recognizing every 7th day as a day set aside to enter his house and fellowship and worship, which is the concept of the Sabbath.
And there is a scripture that tells us that the day is not important. And it's Paul that tells us the day is not important, but you need to be careful with people that are not as far along in their education of Christianity as you are, that you don't offend them. And you don't argue. Like the Seventh-day Adventists, I would not, I'm not gonna argue that point.
Right. Okay, so I did the thing that a lot of us do. I stopped at the first sentence, but there's more to this section on observing the Sabbath day. Let's see if we read it, it gives us more clear understanding. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male nor female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. In other words, who rests one day a week? The slave? If you are resting one day a week, you are no longer a slave. Do you see? So that's the point here. He says, you remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and now you're not. Therefore, you're going to keep the Sabbath. You're going to keep a day set apart. And even your animals, your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals or foreigners in your town are going to keep the day too. Why? Because that's the only way that the servants can keep the day. The servants are people too, and everyone is supposed to keep a day to the Lord.
Okay.
Before we had automobiles, basically you weren't supposed to ride your horse, I guess, on that day.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we take this literally, it would be a violation to hook a horse to your carriage and let it drive you to church.
Sure, it would be. Sure, it would be. It would be, because that's the point, is you're supposed to take a day to just have that to the Lord. You take a day out of all of your work and your labor.
When did it switch? When did we start doing Sunday instead of change? Do you know?
At Christ, it was because Christ rose from the grave, and it's that
That's
symbolism.
why we do it on Sunday.
Well, I think a lot of Jews like to live within walking distance of their synagogue, the way I understand it, so I guess that's the reason.
Mm-hmm. It's to be a set apart day, to be kept holy. 5, commandment number 5. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you.
But I've known some people whose parents weren't that commendable.
In the land the Lord your God has given you. So the honoring your father and mother as your Lord God commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God has given you. The 6th commandment, you shall not murder. 7th, you shall not commit adultery. 8th, you shall not steal. 9, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Verse 22. These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness. And he added nothing more. Then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. When you heard the voice out of the darkness, while the mountain was ablaze with fire, all the leaders of your tribes and your elders came to me. And you said, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and his majesty, and we have heard his voice from the fire. Today we have seen a person can live even if God speaks with them. But now why should we die? This great fire will consume us, and we will die if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer. For what mortal has ever heard the voice of the living God speaking out of fire, as we have and survived? Go near and listen to all the Lord our God says. Then tell us whatever the Lord our God tells you. We will listen and obey. The Lord heard you when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard what this people said to you. Everything they said was good. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. God has a reason why he gave those commands. Verse 30, go tell them to return to their tents, but you stay here with me so that I may give you all the commands, decrees, and laws you are to teach them to follow in the land I am giving them to possess. 32, so be careful to do what the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. The reason for the commands was that, so that they would live and prosper and prolong their days in the land that he was giving to them. That was the whole purpose of it. Now next week at 8 o'clock, we will go into the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 and take a look at how that law, what Jesus says about the law, because Jesus basically goes through the law and says, the law says you cannot murder your neighbor. I say do not hate your neighbor, like that. It talks more about it, expands it. And we can see the difference between the law that was given in the Old Testament and the New Testament, I think what we'll see more are similarities than differences, and a more of an accountability. So next week at 8 o'clock, we'll do a section on the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll be talking about that. Then that way, when we get back, then the following Sunday to our regular 8 and 11 o'clock time, we'll be back in Deuteronomy. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. So, any comments that anyone has about today? Why did God give us the law?
So that it may go well with us.
And with us
And our children, yeah.
and our
that we may
children.
live long in the land.
But he's still giving us a free choice.
Yeah, you can choose to die. That's what he says. You can choose to be disobedient, and you can choose to have the repercussions of that disobedience. You can. Good. Anyone else?
I think that, but wasn't that one of the biggest gifts he gave us, was free will? I mean, you think about human